You always blow everything out of proportion. Eden. My mother's voice, still gentle, but edged like a velvet-wrapped knife. And my father's voice barked from behind the barbecue grill. If you fall, get up. You're not a 3-year-old anymore. I am Eden Ramsey, 28 years old, an elementary school teacher in a small town called Springbrook, Oregon. And on that fateful day, my brother's 31st birthday, I lost all feeling from the waist down. I can still remember Nolan's face, my older brother standing over me, laughing hysterically while I lay motionless on the freshly paved concrete by the new pool. There was no worry in his eyes, only delight. It all started as a joke, a stupid, twisted joke that Nolan always thought was funny, and my parents, they didn't laugh, but they didn't stop it either. They just looked away, like they always did. My family was the kind that, from the outside, looked perfect. A white 2-story house, a manicured lawn, a dad who worked as an accountant, a stay-at-home mom, 2 high-achieving kids. But inside, it was a mental prison. My father, Richard Ramsey, had once been a high school football player, tall, broad-shouldered, a man of few words who believed emotions were weakness. My mother, Sharon, was soft on the outside, but always sided with the one who was right. And the one who was right was always Nolan. My brother was 3 years older than I, the golden child, the darling. The only son was raised like a king. He was indulged, protected, and forgiven. And me, I was the shadow, the overly sensitive daughter, the one to blame whenever things got inconvenient. When I was 10, Nolan shoved me down the stairs, result a broken arm, and a stern warning from Dad. Next time, watch where you're going. Not a single word of concern. Not one, Nolan, what the hell were you thinking? When I was 17, Nolan swapped out my shampoo with hair bleach. I had to wear a beanie to school for 3 months. My mother's response, maybe you should learn to laugh about it. Everyone needs to learn how to toughen up. I moved out the moment I graduated from high school. Went to college in Eugene, then came back to Springbrook to teach elementary school. Life was quiet, solitary, but it was mine. I learned to set boundaries. But boundaries don't exist when your mother calls you at 6:43 on a Friday evening with that sugary tone. Eden, this Sunday is Nolan's birthday. I want you home. Your father rebuilt the pool patio, and it's beautiful. Everyone will be there. I was going to say no, honestly. But then came her next line. It's not like you have anything else going on, right? A soft cut, but deep. I swallowed my protest and nodded into the phone. I'll come, but only in the afternoon. She didn't bother to hide her satisfaction. Good, and don't dress weird. Your father doesn't like that eccentric style of yours. That night, I stood still in my bedroom. My hand rested on a navy blue maxi dress just presentable enough to avoid criticism. Just me enough not to disappear completely. I knew exactly how it would play out. I'd show up. Nolan would mess with me. My parents would look the other way, and I would try to endure it, to get along. Just one afternoon, just one more time. Only, I didn't know it would be the last time I'd ever stand on my own 2 feet. What exactly happened at that birthday party, and why did my own parents end up becoming accomplices to a crime? I don't remember how I screamed. I only remember my body wouldn't move. My eyes stared straight up at the blue sky, empty, numb. All I could hear was my heartbeat. Then, I couldn't feel anything anywhere. Legs, feet, toes. All gone. Eden, A voice called from somewhere far away. I tried to turn my head. One temple was burning hot. The other slammed against the concrete. My whole body felt like it was steaming. Yet underneath, it was strangely cold. It was so cold that I wasn't sure I was even a body anymore. Then the first face appeared. Nolan. And he was laughing. Nice fall. Perfect slapstick comedy. I thought you were just faking it. But turns out your acting's really leveled up. I tried to move. Nothing. I tried to sit up. Nothing. I stammered. I can't feel anything. I can't move. The crowd around me started to gather. A few people looked at me with pity. Then Dad stepped into the circle, his face tight. What is it this time? What stunt are you pulling in the middle of someone's birthday party? Eden. I burst into tears. I fell. I can't move my legs. It hurts so bad. Nonsense. This pool cost over $30,000 to build. It's perfectly designed, anti-slip, and all. What are you trying to pull now? Dad waved his hand dismissively. Mom walked over, holding a glass of wine, her voice leaning close to my ear. That's enough. Eden, are you trying to ruin your brother's birthday again? Get up, wipe your tears. The guests are watching. My heart shattered. I repeated, this time trembling. I can't get up. I'm serious. Please, Mom, Dad, call an ambulance. Mom turned away. Dad went back to the grill, as if nothing had happened. Nolan. He was already back with his friends, waving his hands as he told a story, laughing loud, and me, lying there. A 28-year-old woman, paralyzed, motionless, ignored by her own family. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear, but my body wouldn't let me. Help her! A woman's voice rang out, urgent, clear, commanding. I'm a nurse at Mercy Hospital. Move aside. I need to check her now. Her name was Rachel. She came like the light at the end of a tunnel. She took my wrist and pressed 2 fingers to my pulse. Her expression changed instantly when I told her, I fell, hit my head on the pool. I can't feel my legs. Don't move at all. I'm calling an ambulance now. No need. My mother cut in. She's just putting on a show. This has happened before. No. Rachel interrupted, her eyes never leaving mine. I suspect spinal injury. Moving her could cause permanent paralysis. And then, the first ambulance of my life arrived. And it was also the first time I ever saw my parents truly panic. But not because of me, because of appearances, because of the guests, because the police would be called. Suddenly, Rachel bent down and whispered, I saw something slick on the floor. Do you know who might have done that? I looked toward Nolan. He stood just a few steps away, hands trembling, staring right at me. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't an accident. It was a trap, a staged performance. Why would Nolan do this, and would he be punished or protected yet again? If you're still following this story and feel your chest tighten the way mine once did, subscribe to Revenge Mark, where the truth is told by the voices of those who survived betrayal. You are not alone. We hear you. I woke up to the cold glare of white lights in my eyes, the steady beeping of the heart monitor ringing in my ears. The pain in my lower back burned like fire. But what took my breath away even more was the numbness that still lingered. I couldn't move my legs, not even a little. I turned my head. A young nurse in a blue scrub top smiled gently. Welcome back. I'm Eliza. You're at the Portland Trauma Center. The doctor will be here soon. I tried to speak. My voice was raspy. What happened to me? A few hours later, the doctor arrived. a silver-haired woman with calm yet resolute eyes. Her name was Dr. Amanda Calloway, a neurosurgeon. She sat down beside my bed, pulling out the MRI films. Her voice was steady, without rise or fall. But I heard her clearly. "Eden, you've sustained an injury to the T12L1 region, a fractured vertebra. There's compression of the spinal cord. We performed surgery immediately to relieve the pressure. But you're experiencing temporary paralysis. We can't yet predict the extent of your recovery." Paralysis. That word thundered in my ears, but no one else reacted. "How long? Paralyzed?" I asked, swallowing hard. "It could be months, years, or permanent. We'll know more as we monitor your body's response and rehabilitation." That night, as darkness wrapped around the hospital room, I lay alone and cried. No one came to visit. No call from Mom. No text from Dad. Only silence. I remembered the moment I screamed for help. I remembered Nolan's eyes, gloating, then indifferent. I remembered Mom leaning in, whispering like an order, "Don't ruin the party." They never thought I wouldn't walk again. They never thought I was fragile enough to break. But they also never thought I could be strong enough to stand, even without legs. 2 days later, I was transferred to the rehabilitation ward. Physical therapy began immediately. Every day was a battle between me and the body that no longer obeyed. In the middle of one session, a hospital staff member brought me a package, no return name. Inside was a simple card. No apology, just a neatly written line, in handwriting so familiar my hands trembled. "It's over. Don't make a big deal out of it. Forgive. For family. Mom." I gripped the card tightly, my nails digging into my skin. Don't make a big deal out of it. I lost my ability to walk. I was permanently injured, and they called that a small matter. The next day, a hospital social worker came by, along with a female attorney from the legal aid office. They asked me, "Eden, do you know what caused the accident? Did someone deliberately do something to make the floor slippery?" I looked at them, silent. A part of me was still torn, because they were family. Even if they were a bad family. But then, I remembered Nolan's look when he laughed. I remembered Dad walking away, Mom fixing her hair instead of calling an ambulance. I remembered Rachel's voice, clear and firm. "I suspect there was oil on the floor. This wasn't just an accident." And I spoke. For the first time, I told it. Every detail. Nolan had broken my things before. Nolan had pushed me before. Nolan had once said, "It'd be so funny if you slipped into the pool." And that day, he actually made it happen. The woman taking notes didn't interrupt, didn't judge. When I finished, she asked only one thing. "Do you want us to contact the authorities?" I looked out the window. Light rain was falling. The wheelchair sat beside my bed. My hands were still shaking, but I wasn't afraid anymore. "Yes," I said. My voice was quiet, but certain. "This time, I won't stay silent." The lawyer named Lisa, whom the hospital recommended to me, was the first person to believe me, without needing proof. All she needed was the story. Lisa had eyes that could cut through any lie. She spoke directly, but without judgment. I've seen hundreds of family accident cases, but when women choose silence, the abuser wins. "If you're ready, we'll fight." I nodded. For the first time in my life, I felt I wasn't entirely alone. On my first morning at the rehabilitation center, I sat in my wheelchair, staring into the mirror. My eyes were sunken from lack of sleep. My hair was a tangled mess. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. The nurse named Margot walked in, gentle but firm. All right, Eden, we're starting today. No need to climb a mountain. Just getting out of bed without falling will be a victory. I gave a small smile, but inside, I was shattered. Every time I tightened my core muscles, it was a battle. Every time I lifted my hands off the wheelchair wheels, it was a challenge. My body was no longer mine. It resisted me. It humiliated me. But I still did it. Each tiny movement, each repeated minute, I was rewriting from scratch the things I once thought were the simplest: holding my balance, sitting without trembling, moving my arms strongly enough to push the chair up a slope, breathing evenly when pain shot down my spine. And little by little, I began to change. I recorded everything, just like I used to prepare lesson plans. My physical therapy schedule, my medication list, my diet, my recovery progress. I also began to record a bigger plan. I called it Project 643, the time my mother called me the day before the party. The phone call that started it all. The first page of my notebook was a list of names Nolan intentionally caused harm. Sharon's evasion of responsibility, Richard's interference with medical assistance. I started collecting screenshots of texts my mother sent, statements from Nurse Rachel, reports from the paramedic team, footage from the neighbor's security camera, the one outside their yard. At night, I lay alone in the rehab room, staring at the cold white ceiling. My mind no longer asked, "Why did they do it?" It asked, "How do I make sure they never dare to do this again to anyone?" After 2 weeks, I could push myself down the longest hallway on the treatment floor. Margot stood at the end of the hallway, clapping. "I bet Nolan couldn't do what you're doing. You know what real strength is: standing up without needing anyone to believe in you." I smiled. For the first time, the smile wasn't bitter. I didn't know how far I could go. I didn't yet know what I'd face when I confronted them in court. But I knew one thing: I would no longer be the weak Eden from that day. No longer the daughter who always overreacts. 3 weeks after the accident, I sat in attorney Lisa's office. Beside me was a blue pen. On the desk lay a thick file. The first page read clearly, "Complaint for infliction of serious bodily injury, Eden Ramsey versus Nolan Ramsey and related parties." I looked at the paper once more. My heart pounded so hard it choked my breath. Lisa said nothing. She simply placed her hand lightly on my wrist. Just enough of a touch. I signed. Signed with both trembling hands. But my eyes did not tremble. My eyes were bright like someone who had just returned from the abyss. The lawsuit was filed at 14:17 p.m. By 16:03 p.m., Nolan already knew. How my mother called? 4 times in a row. I didn't answer. Then came the text. "What are you doing? Eden, how could you do this to your own family?" I looked at those words. I didn't reply. I simply sent her a photo of the investigative report from the Civil Investigation Unit, which stated clearly, "Industrial lubricant was found on the new hardwood floor. User Nolan Ramsey." 2 days later, attorney Lisa received an email from my family's legal representative requesting mediation. I refused. I don't need them to apologize in the dark. I want the truth out in the open. And then something I didn't expect happened. A local newspaper, a small one, ran the headline, "Elementary school teacher files lawsuit against her own brother, alleging permanent injury from a cruel prank." The news spread like wildfire. People in Springbrook began whispering. Parents of my students sent letters of encouragement. Old acquaintances called again. Some cried over the phone. I didn't know. I didn't know what they had done to you. And Nolan. He appeared for the first time after the lawsuit, in a short live stream, clean-shaven, neatly dressed. His voice was half sobbing, half reproachful. I never thought my sister would take things this far. It was just an accident. I sat in the rehab room, watching that video without blinking, and for the first time, I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was obvious. The man who had always won every game was afraid. A week later, I received word from the police. They were considering opening an investigation into obstruction of emergency medical assistance by my parents. It could lead to criminal charges. I went still when I heard that. I used to think only Nolan was to blame, but now I understood silence, complicity. That too is a crime. Lisa and I prepared for the first hearing. I was still in a wheelchair, but my voice no longer shook. I looked in the mirror once more. The woman in the mirror was no longer the small, patient school teacher. She was a survivor, a warrior. That night, I wrote in my journal, only one line. The first blow has landed. If this story has made you tear up, furious, or braver, subscribe to Revenge. Mark today. We tell the truth so no one will be silenced again. On Thursday afternoon, I received an email from Lisa. Subject, urgent official response from Nolan and family. I opened the attachment. It was the legal statement from my family's attorney. Short, cold. Every word seemed carefully measured to strip away any humanity. Our client, Mr. Nolan Ramsey, denies all allegations. The Ramsey family is deeply saddened by this serious misunderstanding. Ms. Eden Ramsey is currently in a state of psychological distress and has a tendency to distort events. This is a loving family that has never intended to cause harm. I sat frozen in front of the screen. Psychological distress. Distorting events. They weren't just opposing the lawsuit, they were smearing me. The next day, I saw the first article Nolan had shared on social media, a tabloid site known for publishing cheap, trashy content. Woman sues brother after pool accident. Family friends say she's always been a drama queen. Below were hundreds of comments. She probably just wants fame. Why doesn't she focus on recovery instead of clinging to her family? I know the Ramseys. They're good people. I shut off my computer. My eyes burned, but not from tears. It was from the anger smoldering in my chest. Lisa warned me the very next day, Eden, they're playing the media card. They want you to lose public trust before the case even reaches court. Don't react. Let us handle the legal side. I nodded, but inside, everything was starting to twist. That afternoon, I was practicing walking with the standing frame when a reporter showed up at the rehab center. He wore a suit, was holding a recorder, and was trying to be polite. Hello, Miss Ramsey. I write for the State Times. I just want to ask a few questions. Do you truly believe your family intentionally caused the accident? And do you think this lawsuit might make people lose faith in real accusations? The last question was like a slap in the face. I didn't answer. I just turned away, wheeled myself into my room, and shut the door. Then I broke down. Not because I was weak, but because they knew exactly how to hit where I feared most, that I would be doubted, thought of as a liar. 3 days later, I received an email from my former school, where I had taught for 6 years. Cold. Formal. We have decided to suspend your consulting contract for the duration of your lawsuit. This decision is in the best interest of the school district's public image. I laughed. A hollow, bitter laugh. Then I tore the letter to shreds. Well, they'd done it. They were making me lose everything. I told Margot, the nurse I was closest to at the facility that evening. She held my hand silently. Then she said, "They're powerful, because they've had practice covering things up. But you have something they don't." I looked up. The truth. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop and pulled up the case files, went through every line of testimony, every witness, every piece of camera footage. If they wanted to play dirty, I would answer with the light. The preliminary hearing took place on Monday morning at 9:00. I arrived early, wheelchair, black skirt that fell just past my knees, white blouse, hair neatly brushed by Margot the night before. Lisa placed her hand on my shoulder before we entered the room. She didn't say a word, but that gentle squeeze was enough to steady me. Across the aisle, Nolan sat with two lawyers. My mother sat behind him, her hands clasped tightly, her face cold as stone. I didn't look at them. I only looked straight ahead. The hearing lasted nearly 2 hours. Nolan's lawyer tried to dismiss every allegation, tried to paint a picture of an accident and a family torn apart by misunderstanding. But then Lisa stood up and opened her laptop. "Your Honor, we would like to present security camera footage from a neighbor's house, recorded at 13:32 on the day of the incident." I had watched that footage hundreds of times, but when it played in the courtroom, my heart still clenched tight. Nolan, holding a gas can, pouring it onto the wooden floor, then whistling for someone, laughing, disappearing out of frame. Not a single word in the clip, only images, but far too clear. The entire courtroom fell silent. Lisa continued, "In addition, we request to call witness Rachel Cooper, the nurse who first discovered the victim showing signs of paralysis after the fall and immediately called for emergency care. She is also the one who directly heard the victim's mother say, 'Don't call the ambulance, she's just being dramatic.'" Rachel took the stand, calm, composed. Every word she spoke was like a nail driven into the door Nolan was desperately trying to hold shut. When the hearing recessed, I left the room with Lisa. Outside, the air was cold. Wind swept hard across the courthouse steps, but I felt warm. Lisa tilted her head. "We just landed the first blow that's knocked them off balance." I didn't respond. I simply closed my eyes, letting the wind carry away all the days I'd been treated as a liar. That night, a journalist from the Springbrook Gazette wrote, "Eden Ramsey from ignored victim to the voice that made truth resound in court." The article spread quickly. The number of shares was unexpectedly high. The comments began to shift. If she really has that kind of evidence, she deserves to be heard. No one should be treated like that, especially by their own family. I didn't believe her before. Now I'm ashamed. The next day, I received a message from my former principal. "We'd like to meet with you to discuss the possibility of reinstating our collaboration. Your students still ask, 'When is Ms. Eden coming back?'" I burst into tears, not from sadness, but because the fear of never being believed was finally starting to melt away. I was standing at a turning point. I was still in a wheelchair. I was still in pain. I still didn't know what tomorrow would look like. But I was no longer silent, and for the first time, people were beginning to listen. Until Thursday night, 22:11. Lisa called me. "Eden, they just filed a countersuit. Nolan is suing you for defamation and emotional distress." I was stunned. Nolan's countersuit was filed at 21:58. Lisa called me just a few minutes later. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension in every breath. "Eden, Nolan's countersuit just got confirmed. He's demanding $500,000 for defamation. And he's attaching a report from his own private psychologist. They're playing the image game." I went numb. $500,000. An unimaginable number for a school teacher living on insurance and rehab benefits. All I could say was, "He wants me to be scared." Lisa replied without hesitation, "He wants you to withdraw your case." The next morning, the newspapers started shifting their tone again. Nolan Ramsey strikes back, claims sister is exploiting sympathy to destroy the family. Photos of me in court were spliced together with vague, suggestive headlines. A few YouTube channels began releasing psychological analysis videos. This woman shows signs of wanting to control everything. Is it because she's been jealous of her brother since childhood? I wasn't surprised anymore. I just felt tired. But the real blow didn't come from where I expected. On Tuesday afternoon, I got a message from Margot, the nurse I was closest to at the rehab center. She was the only one who knew I sometimes cried after therapy sessions, the one who would hand me tissues without asking questions. The message was just 3 short lines. "Eden, I'm sorry. Management told me to avoid private contact with you while the lawsuit is ongoing. I don't want to, but if I don't comply, I could lose my job." I stared at the screen. No anger, no yelling, just the slow spread of loneliness, like ink bleeding across white paper. That night, Lisa came to see me in person. She brought a thick folder of subpoenas, press responses, and lists of Nolan's attorneys. She set a cup of tea on the table and looked me straight in the eye. "Eden, I won't lie to you. We're in a tough spot. They have the media. They have money. They have lawyers. They have connections. But we have something they can't fake: time, witnesses, and the truth." I gave a faint smile. "And a medical record you can't make up." Lisa nodded. But then she said something that made me freeze. "They've hired a private investigator. I suspect they're trying to dig into your past. Any mistake, any action they can use to derail the case." I knew. They would dig through everything. Old chat logs, Facebook posts, even the poem I wrote when I was 17, after Nolan locked me in the basement, and no one believed me. Everything would be put under a microscope. And in the middle of it all, I got a call from Rachel, the nurse who saved me that day, the witness. "Eden, I have to be honest. A stranger approached my family. I asked about myself, my work, and my credentials. I can't be sure, but I believe they're trying to discredit me." I felt my heart drop straight into my stomach. Not because I feared for myself, but because I had pulled an innocent person into the storm. I sat in my dimly lit rented room, watching the light filter through the thin curtains. A part of me wanted to let go, to withdraw the case, to go back to teaching, sitting in a classroom full of colorful drawings, reading stories to children. But I knew, if I backed out now, I'd lose everything. Not just the case, but myself. I don't remember exactly when I started losing sleep. I just know the nights feel endless. The clock ticks with every beat. 2:13 a.m., 3:47 a.m., 5:02 a.m. My eyes stay wide open. My chest feels heavy, like a stone pressing down on it. I just lie there, not crying, not thinking, just frozen, as if someone had pressed a pause button on my whole body. The breakdown didn't come like a clap of thunder. It dripped in slowly, bit by bit. Each day, losing one more thing: a person, a source of support, a piece of trust. That morning, Lisa told me Rachel had been suspended temporarily. They said she violated the after-hours contact rule, and they're investigating her certification records. I sat frozen. The question slipped out, almost instinctively. "Because of me." Lisa didn't answer, but her eyes didn't need to. That afternoon, I went online. I shouldn't have, but I did. I found a photo of me, edited together with bold red letters, "The woman who destroyed a family." There was a podcast clip of Nolan speaking in an interview, "I love my sister, but she's trying to destroy me. I don't know what happened to make her this way." Below were thousands of comments. "Drama queen? She must be crazy. A successful man shouldn't be taken down over a joke." I closed my laptop. My legs twitched from the tension. My whole body trembled. That night, during my therapy session, I was told my physical therapy schedule would be cut down to 2 sessions a week because the insurance fund is limited. I nodded. No reaction. But when I was alone in the bathroom, I looked into the mirror, and I didn't recognize the person staring back. That face. Darker. Eyes sunken deep. Lips cracked. Hands that once shook but were determined. Now, they had given up. I started to wonder, had I gone too far? Was I lashing out at people who didn't deserve to be hurt? Rachel, Lisa, Margot. They were only helping me. But because of me, they were dragged into the fire. And me. Was I even completely sure about what happened that day? Could I have been too sensitive? Could I have imagined it? I remembered my mother once saying, "You always overthink everything. Can't you just let things go?" Maybe. She was right that night. I dreamed. I was standing still in the middle of a swimming pool. No one there. No sound. I fell. But no one looked. No one heard. No one came. Only the blinding sunlight reflected off the water, and I sank. Not afraid. Just empty. When I woke up, the clock read 4:11 a.m. I burst into tears, not because of pain, but because I no longer knew who I was. That entire morning, I didn't leave my room. Lisa texted me 3 times, but I didn't reply. The phone rang. It was a call from my old school. I turned it off. I didn't want anyone to see me like this. I didn't want to be like this. I was the one who had once dared to stand in court, who had looked into a camera and said, I was hurt. Now, couldn't even tell myself that I deserved to be believed. At 10:38 a.m., I received an email from Lisa. The very first line made me freeze. Eden, I just met a new witness. Someone unexpected. Someone who wants to stand with you. I read Lisa's email over and over again. No name. Just a short line. An unexpected person. On the way. Inside me, one part dared to hope. Another part didn't dare. After everything I'd learned, this hope is the easiest thing to crush when it's placed in the wrong hands. 11:12 a.m. The door opened. I couldn't believe my eyes. The person who walked in was Daniel Mercer. Back in high school, Daniel used to be Nolan's close friend. One of the guys who often came over to my house, and one of the very few who once saw Nolan push me down the stairs, then looked away. Daniel was 17 back then. I was 14. I still remember his eyes when I sat in the kitchen, cradling my broken arm, trembling. Daniel saw it all, but stayed silent. And now, after all these years, he came back. Daniel sat down, didn't speak for a while. Then, his voice rough, he said, I should have said this a long time ago. I saw Nolan pour the oil that day. I also heard him tell Tyler, wait till you see Eden put on a show after that perfect little slip. I gripped the armrest of my wheelchair. I wouldn't let myself cry. Daniel went on, I stayed silent for far too long. But when I saw you standing alone, fighting back against them, I couldn't turn away again. I looked up. For the first time in weeks, I saw an expression that didn't carry pity. It carried recognition. That afternoon, Lisa took Daniel into the lawyer's office to get his official statement. I didn't follow. I just sat in the hallway, watching sunlight slant through the frosted glass window. And for the first time since those dark days began, I exhaled, without feeling a weight on my chest. That night, I took out my Project 643 notebook. The last page I'd written was almost a month ago. The handwriting had been shaky, the ink blurred by tears. This time, I wrote clearly, just one line: I am not alone. The next day, I called my former principal. His voice was hesitant, but not avoiding. "Eden, maybe when things settle down, we can find a way to get you back in the classroom." I smiled. Not because of the promise, but because I felt I was slowly coming back to myself. I returned to the rehab center, saw Margot again. She hugged me tight and whispered, "I knew you hadn't given up. I knew you weren't the kind to back down." I didn't answer. I just tightened my grip. Stronger? By the end of the week, Lisa sent me the updated case file. Daniel will be a key witness at the upcoming hearing. That same day, Nolan posted a video. No tears, no act, just cold. "I will prove I've been defamed. She will regret this." I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. And when I looked back at the road I'd walked, from a girl lying motionless on cold concrete to a woman ready to stand in court, I knew the fight wasn't over, but the fire in me had reignited. If you've ever felt like you're not strong enough, not loud enough, not supported enough, remember there is always a place where you will be heard. Subscribe to Revenge Mark so you don't miss the conclusion of this journey and the voices that deserve to be told. You are not alone. I walked into Lisa's office at 9:02 a.m. No one said anything for the first few minutes. We just sat there, looking at the plan. On the table were 2 stacks of files, one for the opposing counsel, one for the judge. Both were thick, both were razor sharp. Lisa slid one stack toward me. "This is the last time we go through it. One small mistake, one tiny gap, and they'll sink their teeth in." I nodded, no longer trembling like before. Our strategy wasn't just to bring the truth into the light, it was to force them to face it right there in front of the public. The goal wasn't revenge, it was justice, transparency, and an end to a lifetime of cover-ups. We divided the plan into 3 key points. First witnesses, Daniel, Rachel, and a paramedic who was there that day. They would confirm the exact timeline from the moment I fell to when I was rushed to the hospital. Second, physical evidence. The neighbor's security camera footage. Photos of the scene show traces of oil. A technical report from the civilian investigation team. Third, behavioral history. Emails, text messages, and statements from old acquaintances lay out Nolan's repeated patterns of behavior and the way his family always shielded him. I studied the tactical map Lisa had drawn. It looked like a real battle plan. Each marker was a fact. Each arrow is a calculated move. Lisa looked at me, her eyes softening. "Eden, you've come so far. But remember from this moment on, everything you say, everything you do carries weight." I took a deep breath, leaned back in my wheelchair. I know, and I'm ready. That afternoon, I returned to my small apartment. I opened the old wooden box, the one I hadn't dared to touch for years. Inside were letters I had written to myself at 18. Words are fragile, pleading, desperate to be believed, to be loved, to be seen. I read one, then folded it back. I whispered, "I won't let you write another letter like this ever again." The next day, I went to my final physical therapy session before the trial. Margot was waiting. She didn't say much, just met my eyes in the mirror as I stood up with the walker. "You look a lot stronger than the first day I met you," I answered with a small smile. "Not just on the outside, That evening, I laid out my clothes for court. I chose a charcoal gray blazer, a white blouse, and dark slacks, shoes with low heels. I still needed stability with the walker, but this time, I wanted to stand, even if only for a few minutes. I wanted to face Nolan and my parents at my full height. I stood in front of the mirror one last time. No tears, no rage, just me, Eden, whole, clear, and enough. At 10:42 p.m., Lisa texted, "Tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. Get some sleep. They'll play mind games. But remember, we're ready." I set the phone down, looked up at the ceiling. No more shaking, no more wanting to disappear. Only one echo in my mind. Tomorrow, I take my name back. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:06 a.m. It didn't feel like any time before. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I had accepted that the truth doesn't need anyone to defend it excessively. It only needs to be given the chance to speak. Lisa met me in the hallway. She quickly checked the files, then placed her hand on my arm. "You can enter in your wheelchair, but if you want, we can pause for a moment so you can stand when you go in." I nodded. I want them to see me with their own eyes, not looking down at me like before. The courtroom doors hadn't opened yet. I sat on the waiting bench, eyes on my hands. They weren't trembling now, but inside was still the old echo. You always make such a big deal out of everything. Stop making trouble. It was just a joke. Words I'd heard over and over, like background music for my entire childhood. Then the door on the other side opened. I heard footsteps before I saw the faces. Nolan, Dad, Mom. The three of them walked close together as if they were heading into a Sunday service, not a court hearing. Mom wore a light gray dress, her old pearl necklace still around her neck. Dad wore a deep blue tie, the one he often chose for important meetings. Nolan was freshly shaven, his hair slicked back, and his shirt neatly fitted, as if he were showing up for a respectable job interview. I didn't say anything, and I didn't look away. Our eyes met. Mom was the first to break the silence. She stopped in front of me, didn't bend down, didn't sit, just tilted her head. "Eden, we're family. Are you sure you want to do this?" I replied in a flat voice. "You must have been pretty sure when you left me lying there motionless for 23 minutes before calling an ambulance." Her face froze, just for a moment. Then she turned away. Dad didn't say a word. He just glanced at me, his eyes as if looking at a troublesome contract. Nolan stood there, silent. Then a half smile. "Long time no see, little sister. Hope you can still speak clearly under oath." I looked him straight in the eye. "Hope you can still tell the truth. Just once." The courtroom door opened. The clerk called my name. Lisa squeezed my shoulder gently. I nodded. I took a deep breath, pushed the wheelchair toward the door, then stopped, both hands gripping the armrests. Slowly, I stood up. Not for effect, not for an audience, but because I needed to know, I still could. Every step with the walker was a victory. No applause, no cameras. No one needed to see. I knew. We entered the courtroom. Lisa led the way. I followed. Nolan sat on the other side. My parents are beside him. 3 of them are on one table. I'm just Lisa. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I had less. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The air was thick. In that moment, I understood everything that had been denied was brushed away as if it had never happened. Today, no one can look away anymore. Lisa spoke first. "Your Honor, Today we have 3 witnesses ready to testify and a newly verified piece of evidence. I didn't catch every word. My heart was pounding like a drum. And then the back door of the courtroom opened again. Someone walked in. Someone not on the publicly released witness list. I turned to Lisa. She didn't know either. The person looked up and met my eyes. Who had just appeared in the middle of the trial? Was this a new ally or a calculated move from the other side? The person who walked in was Tyler James, Nolan's former best friend. One of those who once laughed out loud when I fell. Also, someone I never thought would come back, especially at this exact moment. Lisa leaned slightly toward me and asked quietly, "He's not on the witness list. Do you know what this is about?" I shook my head. Inside me was a strange mix of feelings, alertness, suspicion, and then slowly, curiosity. Tyler walked straight to the witness stand, voluntarily. The presiding judge asked once. He confirmed, "I have something I need to say, today." The courtroom grew heavier, like the air before a storm. Tyler was sworn in, and then, without warning, he began to speak. I was there that day from start to finish, and I know Nolan intentionally made the floor slippery. I was the one holding the oil can while he poured it over the wooden planks around the pool. A murmur swept through the room. Nolan turned to look at Tyler. His face went pale. My mother covered her mouth. My father remained motionless. Tyler went on. I laughed. I thought it was just a joke. But when Eden was lying there, and no one did anything, I knew we had gone too far. I stayed silent. Until today. Lisa didn't say a word. She just looked at me, then calmly asked, "Why now?" Tyler took a deep breath. His eyes never left mine. "Because she's still standing, after everything, and I can't keep my head down anymore." Tyler's testimony was like the final hammer strike against the wall Nolan had built around the image of a so-called accidental fall. Lisa immediately submitted new evidence. Old text messages between Nolan and Tyler are vague in content, but enough to support the motive of intentional harm. Then it was my turn. I stood up. This time, I didn't need anyone to help me. My voice didn't shake. I don't want to put anyone in prison. I don't need my enemy to kneel. I just need the truth to be heard. I need others not to grow up like I did, living in a family where hurt was treated as imagination. The judge signaled for Nolan to respond. He stood up. The smirk vanished. His back was slightly hunched. His hands trembled faintly. I didn't think things would go this far. I never wanted to hurt my sister. Lisa stepped forward. Do you deny using lubricant oil so Eden would slip and fall? Silence. Do you deny blocking the call for an ambulance when you saw she couldn't move? Silence. Do you deny that your family has repeatedly covered up acts that harmed her since she was a child? Nolan swallowed hard. And finally, I don't deny it. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Each confession was like a knife being pulled out from an old wound. It didn't hurt more, but it didn't heal either. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I looked at Nolan one last time. He avoided my eyes, for the first time in his life. And I thought betrayal isn't a scream. It's the silence when you need to be believed the most. The court adjourned for lunch. Lisa and I stepped into the waiting room in the back. Neither of us spoke. We sat facing each other, sunlight streaming through the tall window onto our clenched hands. I closed my eyes, breathed slowly, and then the clerk ran in, face drained of color. Attorney Lisa, there's been an incident. Mrs. Sharon Ramsey Eden's mother just... The sentence trailed off. I shot to my feet. I felt like I was about to shatter. I stood up on reflex. My legs barely obeyed. My hands trembled as they clutched the armrest of the chair. My heart pounded in my chest like a warning siren. The clerk tried to steady herself. Mrs. Sharon Ramsey, your mother collapsed in the hallway after leaving the courtroom. The medics are taking her to the nearest emergency room. No one said anything for a few seconds. Lisa gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. There's nothing more we can do right now, and this is not your fault. Eden. I nodded, but my throat felt locked. It wasn't my fault, but I couldn't deny that part of me felt guilty. The trial was adjourned for the afternoon. Lisa left to work with the opposing counsel. I was alone in the witness waiting room. I looked into the mirror on the wall, and for the first time, I saw someone who had just won a battle but wasn't celebrating. Around 3:27 p.m., I received a text from the hospital. Mrs. Sharon had regained consciousness. The initial diagnosis was a sudden spike in blood pressure caused by emotional stress. Not serious, but not minor either. I sat quietly for a while, not sure how I should feel. She didn't call me. She didn't send a message, and I didn't know if I should go see her. That evening, Lisa and I met privately to prepare the closing for the final hearing and sentencing. Lisa was cautious, composed. No one knows how the judge will rule, but we've presented enough. And no matter what the verdict is, Eden, you've already won morally. I looked at her, but the price is an entire family. Lisa replied slowly, you didn't break the family. You just stopped letting that family keep breaking you. The next morning, the courthouse was packed. Reporters were there. A few townspeople I had never spoken to also came to watch. I walked in, this time without the walking frame. The wheelchair was beside me just in case. Nolan was already seated. My father, Richard, sat next to him, still cold as ice, still without a single glance in my direction. My mother was nowhere in sight. I didn't ask. I didn't look. The judge entered. A few minutes of introductions. Then, the verdict was read. After reviewing the evidence, testimony, and conduct of the parties, the court finds Nolan Ramsey is guilty of causing harm through gross negligence, resulting in long-term physical and psychological damage to Eden Ramsey. The defendant is liable for medical costs, emotional distress, and loss of income. The amount wasn't read aloud, but I already knew $2 million. It would come from insurance and personal assets, and the rest could be paid over time. Nolan said nothing, just lowered his head, face pale as paper. My father shot up to his feet, about to protest, but the judge looked straight at him and said, "That's enough, Mr. Ramsey. This courtroom is not for people who see the truth as an inconvenience." As I left the courthouse, I saw that the looks people gave me were no longer pity or doubt. They were the look you give someone who survived. That night, I went home. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the silence. For the first time in months, I no longer felt like I was waiting for someone to apologize. I didn't need anyone's acknowledgement anymore. It was just me and the quiet. But I knew there was still one thing left to do. One person I hadn't faced yet. Not just because I was angry, but because I was afraid. I arrived at the hospital at 9:46 a.m. Mrs. Sharon was still admitted for a few more days of observation. The room was quiet, filled with the familiar scent of antiseptic. The door opened. She turned her head to look. No surprise. No avoidance. Just a weary gaze, older than her real age. I didn't sit down right away. I stood there, looking at the woman who gave birth to me, the woman who once wrapped a cloth around my forehead to wipe the sweat when I had a high fever at 8 years old, and also the woman who turned away many times when I needed her most. "I'm not here to make you apologize," I said, my tone calm. "I'm here to say one last thing, and then I'll leave. Forever, if that's what you want." She drew in a breath. I didn't know things would go this far. I just wanted to keep the peace. I nodded. "I understand. But you know what peace isn't something I can pay for with a broken spine and a fractured heart." A long silence settled between us. Then she asked, "Do you hate me?" I looked at her. "I used to, but I've spent too many years living in that feeling. Now there's no room for hate anymore. Only the truth and the choice to move on." She lowered her head. I saw her shoulders tremble slightly. For the first time, I saw a mother who was no longer the towering figure from my memories, just a woman who at times was nothing more than someone weak, afraid, and wrong. I left the room without looking back, not out of coldness, but because I had said enough. And in that moment, I knew revenge was no longer what was guiding me. 3 months later, I returned to teaching for the first time in nearly 2 years. The kids didn't know what had happened. They only knew to call me Miss Eden and asked what color I wanted to paint the cat. I said, "Orange, like the sunshine." One afternoon, I sat in the schoolyard, the breeze gently blowing. I opened my Project 643 notebook again. I wrote the final line. "Not every wound is healed by justice, but some kinds of justice are born from the wound itself." I closed the notebook. No more tears, only peace. If you followed this story to the very end, I hope you feel the most important thing: no one deserves to be silenced for life. And sometimes, the best healing is to finally speak. If you've ever gone through something similar, share your thoughts in the comments. Who knows? Your words might be the light someone else needs. Don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Mark if you want to continue the journey with stories that are brave, truthful, and worth hearing. And you, no matter how many times you've fallen, you can still stand up in your own name